Rosa Ellis was 83 years old. She was a woman of dignity, grace, and strength, and the years had done little to dull her spirit. Though her steps were slower now, every movement she made was deliberate, as if she knew how precious time truly was. Her hair, silvered with age, was always neatly styled, and she had a way of wearing her clothes that made every outfit seem effortlessly elegant. A pop of red lipstick, a carefully chosen hat, and a soft smile were all she needed to face the world. But that day was different. That day wasn't just any ordinary day. It was the day her grandson, Michael Ellis, a successful CEO, was going to give the keynote speech at a prestigious conference. It was a moment he had worked tirelessly for, and Rosa couldn't wait to be there, to witness the proudest moment of his career. Rosa's pride in Michael ran deep, but what made her even more excited was knowing that this was the culmination of everything he had achieved. From a young man with humble beginnings to someone who now stood at the top of his field, Michael had become a source of inspiration for everyone around him, especially Rosa. She had watched him grow into the man he was today, and she knew that his success wasn't just about business acumen or financial wealth. It was about his heart, his humility, and his dedication to helping others. So, she did what any proud grandmother would do. She dressed up in her best outfit, pinned her hat just right, and set off to attend the event. She wasn't just going to see her grandson give a speech. She was going to be part of a moment that would mark the beginning of a new chapter in his life. She called a taxi, a regular service she had used many times before, and waited patiently outside her house, excited to be part of this important day. The sun was gentle, casting a warm glow over the sidewalk as she stood there, waiting. She could feel the breeze on her face and the anticipation in her chest. She had done everything she could to make sure she was ready for this day. She knew Michael had been preparing for months, and she wanted to be there to support him. Nothing was going to ruin this moment. But what she didn't expect was the treatment she was about to receive. When the taxi pulled up, Rosa took a deep breath, ready to step into the car. The door stayed closed. The driver didn't move. Instead, he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. A wave of unease washed over her as she smiled and tapped on the window, thinking he hadn't seen her. But he had. He looked her up and down, his eyes narrowing as he scoffed, clearly judging her. "You sure this is your ride?" he muttered, his tone harsh and dismissive. His words were like a slap in the face. Rosa, taken aback, tried to maintain her composure. She had been through enough in her life to know how to handle rudeness, but this was different. This was something more insidious. The driver didn't get out of the car to open the door for her. He didn't offer any courtesy or respect. Instead, he simply turned away from her and muttered again, "I'm not lifting anyone today." Rosa stood there stunned for a moment. She wasn't sure if she had heard him right. Was this happening? Had this man really just refused to help her simply because of how she looked? It wasn't lost on her that, at 83 years old, she didn't have the youthful energy she once did. She needed help. But the blatant disrespect was something she wasn't prepared for. Her mind raced. The young woman she had been, full of vitality and confidence, felt so far away now. But she wasn't going to let this moment diminish her spirit. She stood tall, adjusting her hat, and opened the door herself, her hands shaking slightly. As she stepped into the car, she felt the weight of the driver's judgment following her, heavy and cold. She was a grandmother, yes, but she was still a person deserving of dignity. The driver didn't apologize. He didn't offer a word of sympathy. Instead, he grumbled under his breath and started driving, the radio blaring in the background. He didn't care to make conversation. There was no attempt to make her feel comfortable or valued. Rosa, despite the sting of the interaction, kept her chin up. She had always believed in the power of kindness and respect, and she wasn't about to let this moment define her. She smiled at the thought of her grandson's speech, knowing that it would be a day worth remembering, no matter how poorly the ride had started. But little did she know this was just the beginning of a chain of events that would change everything. What the driver didn't know was that the man speaking at the event that night, the one whose career he was so dismissively judging, was Rosa's grandson. Michael Ellis wasn't just any ordinary CEO. He was someone who believed in standing up for what was right, someone who would not stand idly by while the people he loved were treated unjustly. And when Michael found out about the incident, he wasn't going to let it slide. No, he was going to make sure no one ever disrespected his grandmother or anyone like her. Again, he had built his career on values like fairness, respect, and kindness. And he wasn't about to let a taxi driver's rude behavior tarnish that. The ride to the conference was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that would challenge the way people treated others, regardless of age or status. But that was all in the future. For now, Rosa continued her journey, unaware of the storm that was about to unfold. The ride continued in silence, the only sound being the thumping bass of the music blaring from the car's speakers. Rosa sat back in her seat, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled deep within her. The driver, with his cold indifference, hadn't even bothered to ask if she was comfortable. His eyes remained focused on the road, his posture rigid, as if the simple act of transporting her from one place to another was an inconvenience to him. Rosa's thoughts drifted back to the many taxi rides she had taken throughout her life. She had always appreciated the kindness of drivers who would open the door for her, make sure she was settled in, and then wish her well as she went about her day. But this experience felt different. It felt cruel. She had experienced discrimination before, especially as a black woman growing up in a world that wasn't always kind to her. She had worked tirelessly throughout her life, raising children, maintaining a household, and eventually watching her children grow into successful adults. But she never thought she would experience something like this. At her age, when all she wanted was a peaceful life filled with dignity and respect. As the car pulled up to the venue, the large convention center loomed before her, grand and imposing. Michael's speech was set to take place inside, and she couldn't help but feel a pang of excitement. Her grandson, the one who had grown up with such big dreams, was about to speak at a major event. But now, as the car came to a stop, Rosa couldn't shake the weight of the encounter with the driver. It felt like a cloud that hung over her as she opened the door and slowly got out of the cab, her body aching slightly from the rough ride. The driver didn't offer to help her out. He didn't even look at her as she stepped out of the vehicle. He just slammed the door shut and sped away without a second thought, leaving Rosa standing alone on the sidewalk. For a moment, she simply stood there, staring at the large building in front of her. The excitement she had felt earlier was now overshadowed by the events of the ride. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and began walking toward the entrance. She wasn't about to let a rude driver spoil the reason she was here. To see her grandson fulfill his dreams, she wouldn't let this moment of disrespect define her. However, as she entered the building, her nerves began to settle. The air inside was cool, and the buzz of people talking excitedly about the upcoming event filled the space. Rosa walked through the lobby, her eyes scanning for the registration desk. She had arrived a little early, as she always did, and she was eager to find a good seat. She didn't need to be in the front row. She knew Michael would spot her no matter where she sat. But she wanted to feel a sense of belonging, a sense of pride in being part of his moment. As she approached the registration desk, she was greeted by a young woman with a warm smile. The woman quickly found her name on the list and handed her a badge to wear. The tension in Rosa's shoulders eased as she accepted the badge, feeling the kindness in the woman's words. "Have a wonderful time, Mrs. Ellis," the woman said, offering a polite nod. Rosa smiled and thanked her, making her way to the main event area. Her footsteps were slow, but her heart was light. She was determined to enjoy the evening, to take in every word Michael would say, every moment of his speech, and to feel proud of the man he had become. But as she took a seat in the back of the room, her mind couldn't fully focus on the excitement of the event. The memory of the driver's dismissive words and actions still lingered in her thoughts, gnawing at her like a persistent itch. Why had he treated her that way? Why had he refused to help her? She sat in silence, lost in her thoughts, until a voice from the podium interrupted her. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for this very special event," the voice boomed. Rosa's heart skipped a beat. She recognized that voice. It was Michael's. And just like that, the weight of the world seemed to disappear. Rosa sat up straighter, her eyes shining with pride. She could hear the crowd settling down as Michael's speech began. But even as Michael spoke about his journey, his challenges, and his triumphs, Rosa couldn't help but think about the injustice that had just occurred. She knew that there were still people in this world who saw others as less than human because of their age, their appearance, or their status. But Rosa was determined to not let that define her. She had spent her life fighting for her dignity, and now, watching her grandson speak, she felt a new sense of hope. She had raised him to be better than that driver, better than the world that tried to bring them down. And if anything, she knew that Michael's success wasn't just a reflection of his hard work. It was a testament to everything she had taught him. Her grandson was going to change the world, and no one, not even a rude driver, could take that away from them. As Michael's voice continued to rise above the crowd, Rosa's smile returned. She wasn't just here as a grandmother, proud of her grandson's success. She was here to stand for something bigger, for respect, for dignity, and for the unwavering belief that no one, no matter their age or appearance, should ever be treated with disrespect. The speech went on, but Rosa's thoughts were no longer clouded by the taxi driver's rudeness. She had a mission of her own now, to make sure no one would ever treat her, or anyone else, the way she had been treated today. The moment she had waited for had finally arrived, and with it, a newfound determination. The room was filled with applause, but Michael's eyes were only focused on one person, his grandmother Rosa, sitting near the back. Even from this distance, he could see the subtle shift in her posture, the slight curve of her lips as she tried to mask her discomfort. It wasn't just the excitement of the night that was tugging at him. It was something deeper, something he couldn't ignore. He had seen her face earlier when she entered the venue. She was walking slower than usual, but she was there, her dignity intact. Yet Michael knew something wasn't right. The way the crowd had reacted when she entered, the way she had been treated before arriving here. He could see it in her eyes. She wasn't just there as a proud grandmother. She was there with a weight, one he knew all too well. As he spoke, a part of his mind kept replaying the incident with the taxi driver. He could picture it clearly in his head. His grandmother waiting by the side of the road, her simple but elegant outfit, and the driver's dismissive attitude. The way the man had refused to help her into the car. The way he had looked at her, as if she wasn't worth his time. His heart sank at the thought. When the speech wrapped up, Michael excused himself briefly from the crowd, his mind still racing. He found his way backstage and pulled out his phone, scrolling quickly for the app where he could track the taxi ride. The moment the information came up, he felt a surge of anger rise in his chest. He had the driver's details, the timestamps, everything he needed. Michael wasn't the type to let things slide. He knew the system inside out. His business, the company he had built from the ground up, was all about integrity, respect, and accountability. And that was exactly what he intended to hold the taxi company accountable for. He picked up the phone and dialed the number for customer support. He could feel his blood pressure rise as the call connected, the automated message leading him through menu after menu. His hands clenched into fists as he finally got through to a representative. "I'd like to file a complaint about an incident that occurred today," Michael said, his voice steady but firm. "A driver refused to help my elderly grandmother into the car. She was treated with disrespect simply because of her age and appearance. I want this addressed immediately." The representative's response was almost predictable. "Sir, we're sorry to hear about your experience. You're not the first to complain about this. We can offer you a $15 credit to your account as compensation." Michael's jaw clenched. "A credit?" he repeated. "No, this is bigger than a $15 credit. My grandmother was disrespected, and I demand accountability." There was a long pause on the other end, followed by an uneasy response. "Sir, I'll need to escalate this to a supervisor." Michael didn't wait. He hung up the phone and immediately contacted his lawyer. This wasn't just about filing a complaint. It was about making sure this didn't happen to anyone else. Within the hour, he had written a post, something that wasn't just for social media. It was a message that would get noticed. He shared the story on his company's LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram accounts. His words were pointed, but calm, his message direct. "Today, a driver saw my grandmother as less than human. Tomorrow, I'll make sure millions treat elders like royalty." He hit post without hesitation. It felt right. Michael knew that his platform, the one he had worked so hard to build, was more than just a space for business. It was a space for advocacy, for change. The video he posted soon went viral. Within minutes, it was shared across platforms: TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. The footage of Rosa being treated so badly outside the taxi was a powerful visual. People were outraged. Comments flooded in. "How could someone treat an elderly woman like that? This is appalling." "I stand with you, Michael." The next morning, Michael stood in front of a camera at his office, a determined look on his face as he addressed the situation. "This is not just about one driver," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "This is about respect. This is about standing up for the dignity of every person, regardless of their age or their appearance. No one should ever be treated like this, especially by those who are supposed to serve them." Behind him, his assistant began pulling up a press release, detailing the next steps he was about to take. Michael wasn't done yet. "We're launching a new initiative called Respect First," he announced. "We're going to partner with transportation companies to create a program focused on teaching respect and kindness for all passengers, but especially for the elderly. No one will ever have to face what my grandmother faced, But Michael didn't stop there. He knew that true change started with real action. So he proposed an idea that had never been done before in his industry: an integrated user response system. The system, called Open the Door, would allow passengers to rate their experience with drivers in real time, including how respectful and courteous they were toward elderly passengers. He also announced that his company would be working on creating digital solutions to make it easier for older people to book taxis or rideshare services. Voice-activated apps, simplified user interfaces, and special features would make it more accessible for people like his grandmother. That day, the movement had begun. Michael was determined that the mistreatment of the elderly would no longer be swept under the rug. He wasn't just going to sit by and let it continue. He was going to use his voice, his platform, and his resources to make a real change. Rosa might have been the one to suffer the indignity of that taxi ride, but Michael was the one who would make sure that no one else would ever have to go through the same thing again. Part 4. The Ripple Effect of Change. In the weeks that followed, Michael's message resonated far beyond his company. News outlets, bloggers, and social media influencers began sharing the story of Rosa's mistreatment, of the public outcry, and of Michael's resolute stance on dignity and respect for the elderly. The viral impact was undeniable. His campaign was gaining traction across the globe. Michael's Respect First initiative quickly gained support from key stakeholders in the transportation and tech industries. Several major transportation companies, once resistant to change, began expressing interest in collaborating with Michael's team to implement the new training programs for drivers. The Open the Door system was integrated into some major ride-sharing apps, and it wasn't long before other companies started to follow suit, eager to avoid the public backlash Michael had sparked. But for Michael, this was only the beginning. The digital solutions his company had developed to make booking rides easier for seniors became a game changer. They launched a beta version of the voice-activated app tailored specifically for elderly passengers, allowing them to request rides using simple voice commands. The app included features like automatic car door opening requests, emergency contact settings, and even an option for passengers to set their ride preferences for the most courteous and accommodating drivers. It was an app that respected not just their convenience, but their dignity. In parallel, Michael's company also began creating a network of elderly-friendly community hubs. These hubs were located in neighborhoods with a high concentration of older adults and offered everything from free transportation assistance to wellness programs. The hubs weren't just about providing services, they were about providing a sense of belonging, of being seen, of being heard. 1 month after the launch of Respect First, Michael invited Rosa to a press event held at one of the newly opened community hubs. The event was a celebration of the progress they had made, and it featured a speech from Rosa herself. At 83, she had become an unexpected icon of the movement, a symbol of the power of respect and advocacy. Rosa stood before the crowd, a graceful presence even more commanding than when she had first arrived at the event. She had become the face of a new era for elderly care, an era where respect was the foundation. She smiled warmly at the sea of reporters and community leaders gathered to hear her speak. "I don't need a red carpet. I just need people to see that I'm still here, still worthy," she said, her voice steady, yet filled with emotion. The room fell silent and then erupted into applause. Standing next to her, Michael held her hand tightly. This moment wasn't just for her, it was for everyone who had ever been dismissed, ignored, or undervalued. It was for every elderly person who had faced discrimination or indifference. Michael knew that this was more than a company initiative. It was a cultural shift that was happening right before his eyes. "Grandma," he whispered, "you're more than worthy. You're the reason we walk taller." Later that day, as the press conference concluded, Michael reflected on how far they had come. It had started with one taxi ride, one moment of injustice, but it had evolved into a widespread movement for change. He had used his platform and resources to address the systemic issues that had plagued not just the transportation industry, but society as a whole. But Michael didn't want to stop there. He had one more idea, something that could potentially change the way society views its elderly population for good. He launched a new initiative under the banner of the Dignity Project. The goal was simple: to create a global campaign that would champion the rights and dignity of older adults. It wasn't just about accessibility or respect. It was about changing the narrative. The campaign would challenge stereotypes about aging and promote the idea that older adults were just as valuable, capable, and deserving of care as anyone else. Michael knew this wouldn't be easy. It would take time, resources, and a collective effort from every person company, and community, but he was committed to the cause. And now, with a successful track record under his belt, he felt more equipped than ever to make this vision a reality. Weeks passed, and as the project gained momentum, it became clear that the ripple effect of change Michael had started was far-reaching. Communities were becoming more inclusive, transportation services were improving, and elderly individuals were experiencing newfound empowerment. More and more people were talking about respect for the elderly, not as an abstract concept but as a daily practice. In the midst of all this change, Michael never forgot the initial spark. It had all started with Rosa. It had started with one woman being treated unfairly, but through that injustice, an entire movement had been born. For Michael, this journey wasn't just about business success or even public recognition. It was about living with integrity, about standing up for what was right, and about ensuring that every person, no matter their age, was treated with dignity. His company had become more than just a business. It had become a beacon for change. And for Michael, that was the ultimate reward. As for Rosa, she continued to inspire. In the quiet moments of reflection, Michael often thought about the wisdom she had imparted on him. Through her strength and resilience, she had taught him one invaluable lesson: that respect, once given, never fades, and that the power to change the world often lies in the smallest, quietest of actions. And with that, Michael knew this was only the beginning. The journey to build a world of respect and dignity for every elderly person was ongoing, but he was certain of one thing. With every step forward, they were making the world a better, kinder place. Rosa had taught him that change is possible when we start with respect. And now Michael was leading the way to make sure everyone would walk the same path. The hospital was busy, phones ringing, pagers buzzing, nurses moving quickly from one hallway to another, clipboards in hand and eyes set on the next emergency. But in the far corner of the waiting room, beneath a flickering fluorescent light, sat an elderly woman. Her name was Rosa Ellis, 82 years old, thin frame, a soft floral dress she wore every time she had an appointment. Her hair, mostly gray now, was tied neatly into a bun, and her small black purse rested quietly in her lap. She didn't take up much space. She never had. She just waited, quietly, respectfully, like she'd been taught all her life to do. And yet no one noticed her. Not when she first arrived. Not when she asked if someone could check her appointment. Not even when she whispered that her chest felt tight and her breathing didn't feel right. "Take a seat, ma'am," the front desk clerk said without looking up. "You'll be called when it's your turn." So she did. That was nearly 2 hours ago. Now her hands were beginning to tremble. She looked down at her fingers. The tips tingled, and her palms were cold despite the heat in the room. Her heart was beating fast, not from panic, but from something deeper, something that didn't feel quite right. She reached again for help. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm sorry, but I'm really not feeling well." The nurse behind the counter barely glanced up. "I told you we'd call you. We're short-staffed today. There are emergencies ahead of you." A young man in his 20s, clearly with a sprained ankle, hobbled past her and was taken in instantly. She said nothing, just nodded, folded her hands again, waited. Because Rosa Ellis had lived long enough to know how the world worked and what it didn't want to see. A frail old woman. Black skin, no fancy title, no loud voice, no urgent status. She was easy to overlook, and that's exactly what they did. But she was growing tired, her breath more shallow, her vision blurrier than it had been when she walked in. Her phone, an old flip model, buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out with shaking fingers and hit the call button with the name, Mikey. He picked up on the first ring. "Grandma," he said, voice warm but alert. "Everything okay?" There was a pause before she answered. "I don't think they're going to see me," she said softly. "I told them I wasn't feeling well. I tried, Mikey. I really did." He was silent for a second. Then his voice dropped, calm and deliberate. "Nora, where are you?" "Still in the waiting room." "I'm on my way." She tried to protest. "No, honey, you don't have to." But he had already hung up. 15 miles away, Michael Ellis stood in a boardroom surrounded by venture capitalists and advisors. Charts lined the screens. A $12 million partnership was being negotiated. But the moment he heard her voice, the fatigue, the fear, none of it mattered. He closed his laptop, stood up, and spoke only 3 words. "Reschedule the meeting." One of his executives looked confused. "Michael, this is a major investor." Michael didn't even look back. "She called me." Those 3 words were enough. Everyone in that room knew who she was. Because everyone in his life knew that Rosa Ellis wasn't just his grandmother. She was the reason he built his company in the first place. The stories she told him as a kid, about being turned away from clinics as a black woman in the South, about being told she was too emotional when she was actually in pain, about burying a sister who died waiting on a doctor that never came. He hadn't just listened to those stories. He built his mission from them. Alex Health wasn't just a company. It was a promise. A promise that no one, no matter their skin, age, or income, would be left waiting in silence again. And right now, the woman who taught him that promise was waiting. Back at the hospital, Rosa was starting to lean forward. Her hand was pressed to her chest. Her breathing shallowed. Still, no one came. But then, the glass doors at the front of the hospital opened with a swift gust of wind. In walked a tall man in a black overcoat, his pace quick but controlled. Michael scanned the room once, locked eyes with his grandmother, and moved. In 2 long strides, he was at her side. "Grandma," her eyes softened. "Mikey." He took her hand gently, then turned to the nurse's desk. "Excuse me," he said, voice calm but steel-edged. "My grandmother has been waiting here for over 2 hours with chest pain. I need a doctor. Now." The nurse looked up, for the first time truly looking at him. "We've had a few emergencies come in," she began, "and I understand," he said, his voice cutting just enough. "But you'll treat her now, or I will make sure this entire situation is on the front page of every healthcare ethics journal in the country." Another nurse stepped forward. "I'm sorry, sir. Who exactly are you?" He reached into his coat, pulled out a sleek black business card, and placed it gently on the desk. The gold letters gleamed. "Michael J. Ellis, founder and CEO, Alex Health Systems." The nurse blinked. The receptionist swallowed. Within 2 minutes, Rosa was in a private exam room with 2 nurses, a cardiologist, and a diagnostic team. Because suddenly, she mattered. Suddenly, she was someone. But Michael knew better. She had always been someone. It just took his name for them to remember. Inside the exam room, Rosa lay still. Her chest had been wired to monitors. Her blood pressure was being taken. A nurse gently checked her pupils with a penlight, while another inserted an IV with practiced speed. The shift in energy was palpable, the kind of urgency that should have been there 2 hours ago. But now it was a performance. Because now someone important was watching. Michael stood at the edge of the room, jaw tight, arms folded across his chest. He didn't say much, just watched every movement, every beep of the monitor, every unnecessary delay. He wasn't angry. He was focused. He had seen this before, not just in his grandmother's story, but in data, in hundreds of thousands of data points his own company had tracked. Elderly Black patients wait 40% longer for attention in ERs. Complaints about pain from Black women are dismissed twice as often. And unconscious bias kills more quietly than disease ever could. He had built Alex Health to fight that. But today, that fight had arrived in his own bloodline. When the cardiologist stepped in, white coat crisp, expression neutral, he extended his hand politely. "Mr. Ellis, it's an honor. I followed your work." Michael didn't shake it. "She could have died in that lobby," he said. "You understand that, right?" The doctor's smile faltered. "Yes, and we're truly sorry. There seems to have been—" "No," Michael interrupted. "There wasn't a misunderstanding. There was a system, and it worked exactly how it was built to." The room went quiet. Just the soft hiss of oxygen and the steady blip of the heart monitor. The doctor cleared his throat. "We're doing everything we can now." Michael finally looked him in the eye. "Now," he repeated, then turned and walked out. Down the hallway, Michael headed straight for the administrator's office. His assistant, who had been trying to reach him about rescheduling his VC call, caught up with him just outside the elevators. "Mike, I got the director of operations on the line. He's in a meeting." Michael took the phone. "Tell him I'm here, and I'm not leaving." 10 minutes later, a hastily gathered group of hospital executives sat around a long glass table. Some wore suits, others lab coats. Most looked uncomfortable. A few looked annoyed. Michael stood at the head of the table. No slides, no pitch deck, just presence. He dropped a thick folder onto the table. Inside that is a 1-year breakdown of patient response times at this hospital. Compared to demographic data you probably don't even track. A few brows raised. "This is your hospital's problem in numbers," he continued. "And this morning, it became my family's problem too." The head of HR spoke first. "We're very sorry about your grandmother's experience." Michael raised a hand. "This isn't about apologies, it's about accountability." He opened the folder. Page after page showed data charts, surveys, internal feedback loops from whistleblowers, and notes from frontline nurses. "This isn't the first time someone like her got ignored. It's just the first time someone like me showed up to notice." The room fell silent. Michael let the silence sit. It was more powerful than shouting. Then he laid out his terms. For every staff member, from janitorial to chief of medicine, not a checkbox course, a real measurable training with patient outcome tracking. Placed in lobbies and waiting areas, patients can report discrimination, in real time via voice or screen input. His company would donate its diagnostic flow software, already in use at major tech hospitals, to analyze triage bias across gender, age, and race. Patients can see estimated wait times by name and condition to eliminate silent sorting based on appearance. He finished with one line: "If your hospital doesn't lead this change, I'll make sure the next hospital does. And the next, until this becomes federal policy." No one interrupted. They couldn't. He wasn't just the CEO of a company. He was the grandson of a woman who had been invisible until he made her seen. An hour later, Michael walked back to Rosa's room. She was awake now, tired but smiling. "You didn't yell, did you?" she asked gently. He chuckled. "No, Grandma, I told the truth. That was enough." She reached for his hand. "You know, when I was your age,